Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. Is President Biden lying to us? Is he dishonest? In fact, an Obama era official actually called President Biden dishonest, and he said, I quote, "The Biden claim that supply chain is to blame for inflation is totally dishonest." Incredible. Let's show you this headline on your screen from Fox Business. Biden claimed that supply chain is to blame for inflation is totally dishonest, according to an Obama era official. In fact, he said the overstimulated economy is a root cause of the inflation surge, not supply chains. Now, let me give you some background. President Biden has been blaming the tangled supply chains for all the inflation, for the fact that milk is more expensive, eggs are more expensive, it's getting more expensive to fill up gas in our cars. President Biden has been blaming supply chains, and this is impacting every aspect of the U.S. economy. In fact, a former Obama administration official dismissed that as a totally dishonest argument. And let me actually tell you what's going on. In an op-ed for the New York Times, Stephen Ratner, who, by the way, served as a counselor to the Treasury Secretary under then President Barack Obama, accused President Biden of mischaracterizing the once-in-a-generation inflation spurt that Americans are experiencing. In fact, let's show you this headline from the New York Times. Biden keeps blaming the supply chain for inflation that is dishonest. Think about that for a second. An Obama-era official, and by the way, at that time, as you know, President Joe Biden was Vice President Joe Biden. He said, and this is the headline of the article, Biden keeps blaming the supply chain for inflation that's dishonest. In fact, Ratner wrote this: supply chain issues are by no means the root cause of our inflation. Blaming inflation on supply lines is like complaining about your sweater keeping you too warm after you've added several logs to the fireplace. The bulk of our supply problems are the product of an overstimulated economy, not the cause of it. Think about that for a second. Again, this is coming from an Obama-era official. And Ratner was actually referring to comments that President Biden made during an interview last week with NBC News' Lester Holt, in which the president said pandemic-induced bottlenecks in the global supply chain were the largest driver of soaring consumer prices. In fact, President Biden pointed out that semiconductor shortages, which have continued to delay car manufacturing and have contributed to a 12.2% increase in vehicle costs, President Biden said that that's what's causing inflation. That was one example. I'm quoting President Biden. The reason for the inflation is the supply chains were cut off, meaning that the products, for example, automobiles, the lack of computer chips to be able to build those automobiles so they could function, they need those computer chips. They were not available. Now, let me know whether you agree or disagree with President Biden's argument. In fact, let's take a look at a very interesting discussion between Fox News' Maria Bartiromo and Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi actually joined Mornings with Maria to discuss inflation, the producer price index, and the possibility of a recession. He actually predicted that inflation will taper off as the pandemic subsides. Let's roll the tape and check out this discussion between Maria Bartiromo, Fox Business, and Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi as they were discussing this entire situation. Let's roll the tape and watch.
What are you expecting from the PPI, which is out in about 25 minutes?
It's good morning, Maria. It'll be a hot number, up about 4 or 0.5% on the month, and year over year, close to 9.5%. So a very strong rate of inflation coming into 2022.
Yeah, economists are predicting a gain of 9.1% year over year. How long will it take to tamper this down? The Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates multiple times this year. Will they be able to stomp out what has been a serious issue for American families with inflation?
Yeah, I think so. Maria. I think inflation actually has peaked. It probably peaked back in the fall. That's when the month-to-month increases were at their apex. And that's when the pandemic, the Delta wave of the pandemic was doing its most damage to global supply chains, labor markets. It was scrambling the energy markets. Things are still, scrambled. It's taking a while to get things back in order, but they're moving in the right direction. And I do think that as the pandemic fades, and I think that's the most likely scenario going forward, we'll start to see supply chains, labor markets, product markets start to iron things out and inflation moderate. But having said that, it is critical for the Federal Reserve to normalize policy. They're behind things at this point. They need to catch up, and they're going to start in mid-March in a few weeks. But they've got a lot of work to do this year to get interest rates back to something that's more consistent with the strength of the economy.
Well, Mark, you said we're moving in the right direction. We're expecting a very severe increase in the producer price index on inflation as we see a severe impact from consumer inflation as well. And now we're starting to talk about recession on the horizon.
Now, getting back to President Biden for a second, I want you to know that President Biden said, I quote, "It's a classic economic case of too much money chasing too few goods, resulting in both higher prices and, given the extreme surge in demand, shortages." Now, again, let me know whether you agree or disagree with President Biden's comments. In the meantime, let's go back to some additional comments featuring the Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi on Mornings with Maria about this exact subject. And you let me know whether you agree or disagree with President Biden's claim that the supply chain is to blame for inflation, and whether you agree that that's true or whether you disagree and you believe that that's totally dishonest, as the Obama era official said. Let's roll the tape and hear this discussion between Mark Zandi and Maria Bartiromo. Let's watch.
But Mark, I mean, you say that things are going to lessen on the inflation front. You also told us inflation was transitory about 6 months ago. So what's the evidence that it's going to slow down?
Well, transitory, I think it is transitory. I think it is temporary. I think it's related.
But it hasn't been transitory.
No, it has. I mean, if you go back to the peak of inflation, month to month, well, the peak in CPI inflation, for example, was October of last year. That's when the CPI increased 1% in that given month.
And that's when Delta was at a 40-year high right now. Consumer inflation's at a 40-year high right now. You don't think that now's the peak? You don't think next month we'll see the same number? You think the peak happened last year?
No. I think the year-over-year numbers, Maria, they're obscuring things because there's these so-called base effects. You're looking compared to last year at this time. If you remember, hard to remember, obviously, but a year ago, inflation was incredibly low.
I'm just looking at what I pay at the cash register, Mark. I'm just looking at what I pay at the cash register, and I know meat is up in the double digits. I know gasoline is up 60%. So I'm looking at what I have to take money out of my wallet to pay for stuff. That's what I'm looking at.
I hear you. And prices are rising. There's no doubt about it. I'm just saying the rate of increase. Yeah. So the increase in price you paid this month, Maria, is less than the rate of increase you paid back 6 months ago. To me, that means inflation is moving in the right direction. Is it where we need it? Obviously not. We got a long way to go. And what I'm saying is still very much a forecast, but my sense is the underlying cause of the high inflation is the pandemic, and as that goes away, inflation should moderate. Is it going to happen quickly? No. So hang in there, Maria. But you'll see better when you go buy some meat, or you go to fill your gas tank. 6 months from now, you'll be feeling better about things.
And finally, this is what Ratner said that the Biden administration must do in order to try and bring these prices back in control. Instead of focusing on passing another $1 trillion spending package, the economist suggested that the White House should prioritize reducing the deficit. That's how Bill Clinton pivoted after he took office in 1993. He unexpectedly raised taxes in his budget to address the pressing matter of the federal budget deficit. That decision served the country well and ultimately also served him well. Do you think President Biden should try and reduce the natural deficit and bring our spending back in control, or should he spend like a drunk sailor? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. Also, let me know what you thought of Mark Zandi's comments and his discussion with Maria Bartiromo. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is ignition_time. That's ignition_time. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.